Good evening, Soundside Church. Pastor Aaron coming to you and to your community group in particular. Welcome to our fall session of our community groups here in 2023. And this fall, we have something very exciting lined up for your community group. We are going to be going through this little tiny book called Before You Share Your Faith, 5 Ways to Be Evangelism Ready. Now, I want to go ahead and preface this by saying I read this book a little bit earlier this year. I was challenged by it, I was encouraged, and I was helped to the degree that I think that all of us can be helped. Now, if you're sitting there saying another evangelism resource, another evangelism class, another evangelism tool, well, yes and no. On the one hand, we can never really be too encouraged to share the gospel. But on the other, one of the things that this book does that so many other books don't is it actually starts before the process of evangelism, which is what the title said, before you share your faith. But before we look at before you share your faith, I'd like for us to just spend one session asking a couple very simple questions. And the first question that I'm going to have you ask tonight is, what are you doing here? That is, why are you at community group tonight? What are you hoping to get or accomplish? Why are you here? Of course, hanging out with Jesus people is always a good thing, especially if you share common interests. But Soundside Church has a very, very specific purpose for our community groups. We don't always highlight this as much as we should, but I want to take a moment and point out that the purpose of our community groups is relational discipleship. That is what we have always said the purpose of this is, relational discipleship. Okay, so when you come to a community group, you're not coming to a class. Okay, now typically what we've been doing for the last year and a half, 2 years is whatever we're looking at, whether it's a book or it's a book of the Bible, I typically handle the teaching. Now, that's on purpose because I want to make sure that we lower the bar of participation for those who want to help lead our community groups. I can use my time and gifting, I think, to help teach the material, leaving our community group leaders open and available to help shepherd or lead the group, which means that you don't have to be a pastor or an elder or anything in particular to lead one of our community groups. Not necessarily the best fit for everyone, but literally anyone could consider it because we're not asking you to teach a class. We're asking you to lead a group, and that's a very different set of giftings and passions and responsibilities. So this isn't a class per se, although we do hope you learn some things. Likewise, it's not a Bible study. You'll hear us emphasize this, and there's a very important reason for it. While we will open our Bibles, we will study our Bibles, we will hopefully grow in our knowledge of the Bible, we want to stress that this is not a Bible study. And that is because too often Bible study gets confused with discipleship. Can I say it to you very simply? Transformation is more important than information. You can walk away with a head full of information and be no closer to Jesus Christ. We want you to be transformed. And that's why we call it relational discipleship. The relationships that you form with the people in your group become the environment and the context for discipleship to take place. And by discipleship, I mean we want you to grow closer to Jesus Christ, closer to his image, that your life actually changes as a result of these community groups. So as you dive into your community group this fall, I want to encourage you to pursue that kind of transformation. For some of you, it's going to be massive steps that you're going to make. For others of you, it might be incremental. But the point is that we're getting closer to Jesus, regardless of how big those steps are. So let me encourage you to do a few things, or rather to not do a few things. As you get into community group and as you get into the discussion time, recognize that the discussions are really designed to help open your mind, open your heart. And the relationships in the room are an environment, hopefully, that where we can be honest and transparent. So instead of deflecting by debating the interpretation of whatever we're studying, instead of spending most of our time complaining about things in our lives, instead of trying to find out how to be more Christ-like, instead of doing these things, let's instead focus on how can I grow closer to Jesus. There are many ways of missing the point. There are many ways of using this time in a way that doesn't actually accomplish the goal. And the goal is, as I said, relational discipleship. That brings us to the second question. What do we mean by discipleship? And that is actually where I hope most of your discussion tonight goes. What do we mean by discipleship? And I'm asking this question because not only is it the purpose of our groups, but it also pertains to what we're talking about in this book, before you share your faith. Sharing your faith is part of what we consider to be the mission of the church, the mission of every Christian. Jesus said it most clearly in Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20, when he said, "Go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything that I've commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." Our commission as a church and as Christians is to make disciples of Jesus. Sharing our faith with people is part of how we do that. But I want to go ahead and ask you the question, what do you think it means to make disciples? Has anyone ever discipled you? How did they do it? If you were going to make a disciple of Jesus, how would you go about it? You see, these questions help us dig down to what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus, and how do we make disciples of Jesus? That is a question and a conversation that I hope we as a church can dig deeply into, not just in this series as we go through this little book, but also as we move forward in our life as a church and seek to fulfill Christ's commission in the community that he has placed us in. So tonight is going to be more of a survey than a discussion. We want to hear from you. Your community group leader is going to be keeping track of what you say tonight, because we want to know. We want to know where you're at. We want to know where we need to be. So that's what we're looking at tonight, talking about what does it even mean to make a disciple, because it's important to know what the goal is before we even talk about what happens before we share our faith. Next session, next week, we will begin by looking at chapter 1 of this book. You do not have to have this book to participate in your community group this fall, okay? It's a very small book. It's very easy to read. I would encourage you to get your own copy of it and read it. We'll be highlighting it as our book of the month for the church. But you do not have to have it in order to participate meaningfully in our group discussion. That'll partially be my job to help bring the material from the book into our community group discussion so that we can all profit from it. So read it if you can, but if you can't, don't worry about it. Once again, we want to try to lower that bar of participation in our community groups so that we can get to the real goal, and that is of building relationships in which we can all grow together as disciples of Jesus. Take a look around your room. You need those people, and those people need you in order to grow to be like Jesus. So, with that said, I'm going to turn things over to your community group leader now.